Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 238. Mr. Browne. James Warwick Browne was born on the 18th of November 1864 at Kirgunyah station near Yackandandah, Victoria, to Wallace Browne and Emma Kilminster. His father Wallace was born in Ireland and emigrated to Victoria in 1859 when he was 21. For a very detailed record of the life and family of Wallace Arthur Browne, online there is a story of Wallace Arthur Browne and Emma Kilminster, and I will add the link to the Facebook page and the notes. Wallace Arthur Browne was a cousin of Henry Osborne, and after his arrival in Australia worked for Henry's son, Henry Hill Osborne, in the Riverina. The Osbornes in Ireland were a relatively wealthy family. Two of Henry Osborne's brothers were doctors, who at one stage travelled regularly to Australia as surgeons on the convict ships. They probably influenced Henry to migrate to Australia. Henry Osborne arrived in Australia in 1829, and after he married his wife Sarah, returned in 1842. Henry was squatting on land in the Riverina district, and by 1848 his station, Brookong, was listed with 480,000 acres. When Wallace emigrated, he came to Kirgunyah station near Henty, where he met Emma Kilminster, who had come to work there as a housemaid. Emma had been born in Albury. Her father, George Kilminster, was an English-born convict. At the age of 13, on the 29th of March 1834, George Kilminster was convicted and sailed out on the Bengal Merchant on the 27th of September 1834 and arrived in New South Wales on the 30th of January 1835. George Kilminster was convicted for robbing his stepfather. His mother wrote many letters pleading for him to be forgiven and sent home. George married Elizabeth Hillier in Melbourne in 1844. Elizabeth was a free settler who arrived when she was 20. She had a son in 1843, and she went on to have 10 children with George. Emma Kilminster was only 14 when her mother died and 15 when her father died. On the 9th of August 1864 at St Matthew's Church in Albury, Wallace married Emma. By this stage, Wallace owned land at Yackandandah, and by 1869 he purchased a property that they called Mile at Erangeline in New South Wales. By 1890, when their youngest child was born, they were living at Pleasant Hills, New South Wales, and from 1914 were living in Kew, Victoria. James was the eldest child of the family. Emma died on the 8th of April 1929 in Albury. Her death was announced in the Lockhart Review and Oakland's Advertiser on the 9th of April 1929. The death is announced of Mrs. Browne Sr., who for a considerable number of years has lived with her son, Mr. H. Browne of Cockatoo Islands, Jackson's Waterholes. She was an early pioneer resident of the Pleasant Hills district. Her surviving sons are Councillor W. S. Browne, JP of Waverley, Pleasant Hills, Mr. H. Browne, Mr. D. L. Browne of Mile, Erangeline, and Mr. Reg Browne of Pleasant Hills. There are 2 or 3 daughters residing in Melbourne. So interestingly that James Warwick was not mentioned in his mother's death notice. Wallace died on the 19th of May 1929 in Hawthorn from injuries from a collision between an electric tram and his motorcar. He was 97. In a newspaper article it said Mr. Wallace Browne, 97 of Burwood Road, Auburn, died at St George's Private Hospital in Kew yesterday following a motor accident 3 weeks ago. He was born at Omagh, County Tyrone, Ireland, and arrived in Melbourne in the Royal Charter early in 1869 and went to the Buckland gold diggings at Yackandandah. Later he became manager of the station property of the late Mr. James Osborne at Little River and Kirgunyah in New South Wales. He was a pioneer of the Erangeline Creek district, where he held large interests. 30 years ago he retired and has since lived in Kew. His wife predeceased him at the age of 84. Mr. Browne was a frequent visitor to Healesville during the last 30 years. He was a well-known breeder of trotting ponies, and a beautiful pair of cream ponies were the admiration of Melbourne in the early days. He was a member of the Presbyterian Church and a faithful adherent of the book. The funeral took place at the Box Hill Cemetery, followed by a large number of sorrowing relatives and friends.
among whom were his eldest son, Mr W Browne, JP of Woy Woy, New South Wales, Councillor W.S. Browne of Lockhart. Mr Browne has left a family of 10, 5 sons and 5 daughters, with 28 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren. In 1881, James Browne eloped with Mary Mays. She was a governess at Mile, so on the family property, and he was only 17. Mary was 21 and had been born in 1860 in Victoria. John Browne is recorded as living in South Australia in February 1887. In the Adelaide Observer, it says, on Wednesday, J.W. Browne and T. Marnie sold to the Commissioner of Crown Lands a nugget weighing 14 ounces, which they discovered at Watts Gully. The nugget was discovered on a piece of unworked ground 7 miles north of Gummaracha. There were 4 sons, one born in 1881, Wallace Browne. He died in 1900, killed by a train at a level crossing accident. He was only 19, and he had 2 children, a boy and a girl, with Lily White. There was a stillborn child born in 1887. The death notice for this child was placed in the Evening Journal of Adelaide on the 6th of September 1887. Browne, on the 2nd of September at Ada Villa, Park Street, Unley, the wife of James Warwick Browne, of a son, stillborn. There was another child born in 1887 and another in 1888. Family trees have that the son that was born in 1888, and all I can find is T. Browne, died in World War I. The next we see of James Browne is 4 days later in the Adelaide Observer on the 10th of September 1887, a wholesale slaughtering depot. To the editor. Sir, allow me to draw the attention of your readers to the splendid opening there at Terawee for any practical man of business with moderate capital to establish a business which would at once benefit the colony and also be very profitable to himself. I refer to the establishment of a wholesale slaughtering depot from which the city butchers could get their meat. Terawee is the terminus of a broad gauge railway, and it also occupies a central position in the north. And that letter to the editor was written by J. Warwick Browne of Park Street, Unley. On the 13th of November 1888 in the South Australian Advertiser. Central Australians Exploring and Prospecting Association, Unley, 12th of November 1888. Sir, allow me to call the attention of the shareholders to some particulars relating to the late expedition sent out by it, of which I was the leader. The director's report gives reasons for disbanding the party. First, dissensions between the officers. Second, the report of Mr. East that no discoveries had been made worth retaining or working. Under the circumstances, dissensions were almost unavoidable. I was placed in the position of leader of the expedition. Mr. East was second in command, not under my authority. It needs no great consideration to show that this was a very awkward arrangement for both Mr. East and myself, and still more so for the men. No man can serve 2 masters. Before we had been out a month, difficulties and dissensions arose in consequence of there being no recognised head of affairs. I, being the leader, considered myself perfectly justified in leading the party in my own way. Mr. East apparently thought, as he was somewhat older than myself, I should have deferred to him. Hence the dissensions. As to Mr. East's report that I had failed to show any discoveries worth retaining of working, I cannot understand this, for I myself saw a report which Mr. East sent to the directors either in the last week of May or the first week of June, in which he recommended them to work some claims which I described as white cement carrying gold. We sent specimens of gold down at the time. We also sent specimens of high percentage copper ore. In conclusion, let me state I have no wish to provoke a discussion, but I was unfortunately unable to attend Thursday's meeting, and I consider this explanation due to the shareholders. J. W. Browne, Unley. On the 12th of April 1893, in Glebe, a warrant has been issued by the Glebe Bench for the arrest of James Warwick Browne, charged with the abduction of Eva Metivier Rose, she being under the age of 21, that is 20 years, out of the possession and against the will of her father, Robert Cooper Rose. Description: 32 years of age, 5 foot 9 or 10 inches high, medium build, fair complexion, brown hair, brown beard and whiskers and moustache, dressed in a brown walking coat, dark tweed trousers and vest, and a bell-topper hat. Was lately in the employ of McDonnell & Co., insurance agents of Pitt Street, Sydney. Complainant Robert Cooper Rose in Cottenham Street, Glebe. So where is Mary Mays, and what about the children? Well, I did find a death record for a Mary Browne that died in Adelaide in 1890. So it's quite likely that Mary died and then he took the children over back to New South Wales. So he was in South Australia. By 1893 he was in Sydney, and in 1894 had moved to Woy Woy in New South Wales. He erected a mill for cutting firewood and a trolley line to carry the wood from the mill to a jetty on the beach, where he would ship the wood for sale in Sydney. James became a processor and an exporter of giant maidenhair ferns that grew prolifically around the Woy Woy district. He exported to the botanical industry of Germany, France, Belgium, Switzerland and the US. He occupied 150 acres of land extending from Blackwall Mountain to the junction of the present-day picnic parade and esplanade at Ettalong Beach. He built a commodious timber residence at the foot of Blackwall Mountain and named it Patonga. 2 statues stood on either side of the front steps of the house, which had verandas to the fronts and sides and a matching pair of bay windows that overlooked the family property. There is a photo, the source is of the Gosford Library, that I'll place on my Facebook page. During World War I, Browne joined the rush to subdivide land on the peninsula. His subdivision was called Patonga Park Estate, and it consisted of over 700 blocks. Lurleen Street was named after Browne's daughter. The site of Patonga House eventually became the site of the Ettalong Caravan Park. James and Eva had a son, Wallace James Richard Browne, on the 24th of March 1895 in Toowoomba, Queensland. He married her at Dungong, New South Wales, and they had a further 3 children. He worked with his father in the export business at Woy Woy, and Wallace died on the 17th of April 1958 in Sydney at the age of 63. James married Eva 5 months after they had Wallace on the 22nd of August 1895 at St David's in Surrey Hills, Sydney. They also had a daughter, Eva Lurleen Osborne Browne, on the 2nd of June 1897 in St Leonards, New South Wales. On the 20th of February 1919 in the Gosford Times and Wyong District Advocate, Miss Lurleen Browne, daughter of Mr and Mrs W Browne of Patonga, Woy Woy, underwent a serious operation on Saturday at Sir Alexander McCormick's private hospital, the Terraces in Paddington. The operation was performed by Sir Alexander, with a large stone being removed from the left kidney. Owing to her daughter's illness, Mrs Browne will be absent from Red Cross duties and hopes that members will, on her behalf as President, give a hearty welcome home to our returning lads. Miss Browne has been a spirited worker for the many patriotic movements inaugurated in Woy Woy, and we wish her a speedy recovery. Lurleen married Charles Henry Kingston in 1921 in Sydney. On the 12th of May 1921 in the Gosford Times and Wyong District Advocate, it outlined their wedding. Military wedding, Kingston Browne. Miss Lurleen Browne, only daughter of Mr and Mrs J.W. Browne of Patonga, Woy Woy, was married on Saturday the 30th of April at St Stephen's Church in Sydney to Mr Charles H. Kingston, AIF, the third son of Mr and Mrs H.C. Kingston of Stawell, Victoria. The bridegroom and his attendants, Mr Otto Roeder and Mr Wallace Browne, the bride's brother, wore their uniforms, all having been on active service with the Cycling Corps. After the ceremony, Mr and Mrs Browne entertained over 100 guests in the gallery banqueting room at Wentworth Winter Garden. The happy couple left by car for the Jenolan Caves, where the honeymoon will be spent. The presents were so many and costly that it was impossible to show them at the reception. They were, however, displayed at an evening held last weekend at Patonga. The gifts included a number of cheques sent from various parts of the Commonwealth. Mr and Mrs Kingston will make their home at Mayfield in Newcastle. Lurleen and Charles had 3 children. Charles was also part of the export business until World War II, and then he was an assayer. Lurleen died on the 7th of December 1972 in Ryde, New South Wales. By 1908, James had a child with Vera Meskel, or Vera Norris, in Paddington, New South Wales. Her name was Dorothy Browne. Then after the war, James took up a parcel of land for basalt mining. However, the project was abandoned as the venture proved unviable. On the 14th of February 1924 in Brisbane, James commenced a relationship with Mildred Hannah Foster, known as Annie. Annie was 18 and James was 59. They had 4 children. The first was Wanda Lilas in 1924, who married Alan Leonard Cook, a butcher, in 1943 in Sydney. Wanda died on the 30th of November 2012 at Tuncurry in New South Wales. They had 4 children. On the 19th of August 1924 in the Sydney Evening News, it announced the judicial separation of Eva M. Browne of Lorraine at Ettalong Beach that was granted from her husband James Warwick Browne of Woy Woy on the grounds of his alleged adultery with various women named in the petition. Eva was granted permanent alimony at the rate of £1,250 a year, and the respondent was ordered to pay the costs of the suit. Eva Mativia Browne was married to James Warwick Browne on the 22nd of August 1895. In August last, Mrs. Browne was granted a decree for judicial separation. Mr. Browne, who is worth £80,000, was then directed to pay £472 per year as permanent alimony to his wife, and on Tuesday last, the wife applied to the judge in divorce to have a petition by the husband for the reduction of the amount of permanent alimony dismissed. So in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 3rd of May 1927, in divorce, Browne versus Browne. The petitioner, James Warwick Browne, petitioned in this suit for a divorce from his wife. Eva Mativia Browne, formerly Rose, alleging adultery with one Bruce Nicol, who was joined as co-respondent. Petitioner and respondent were married at St David's Church, Surrey Hills in 1896, according to the rites of the Church of England. The respondent filed answers in which she accused the petitioner of committing adultery with women named Marie Rigney, Violet Lewis, Vera Lewis, otherwise known as Vera Norris and Vera Miskell, Rose Miskell, Mildred Anna Smith, and 2 other women unknown to her at various times and places. The co-respondent denied the alleged adultery and defended the suit. The suit is part heard. Then in the Sun News pictorial in Melbourne, Claude me, husband about wife. James Warwick Browne of Woy Woy, manufacturer. Browne was formerly a Victorian grazier. In the witness box, he said that on the 23rd of June, he was in company with several agents and he waited at night outside the door of a certain flat and he saw his wife correspond with another. I went to the door and she clawed me and drew blood. In the South Australian Advertiser on the 5th of May 1927, private detectives, a solicitor's attack. A crowded gallery listened today to the evidence in the Browne divorce suit, which is being heard by Mr Justice Owen. James Warwick Browne is petitioning for the dissolution of his marriage with Eva Mativia Browne. The evidence was concluded, and in his address, Mr Curtis KC, who is appearing as counsel for the wife, made a strong attack on private detectives. These men had minds that were saturated with filth, and if Angel Gabriel were to hover in their presence, he would not escape conviction. At the same time, he did not think that they were as low as the petitioner, judging by his attitude towards his wife in this case. On the 4th of May 1927 in the Melbourne Sun News pictorial. Hearing today in the Browne divorce suit in which James Warwick Browne, the wealthy Woy Woy manufacturer, and his wife are each accusing the other of impropriety, consisted in the main of a flood of denials. Mrs Browne, a middle-aged woman, denied emphatically that she'd ever misconducted herself with Captain Bruce Nicol, the co-respondent, nor had she ever been familiar with him in any way. He had not come to her flat on the night of the 25th of June 1926, but he had bought her a packet of tea the following morning. When her husband arrived, Nicol was not wearing a pyjama coat but a striped shirt. At no time had she sent telegrams to Browne stating that the fullest publicity was to be given to the case. In the box, Captain Nicol said he had never been familiar with Mrs Browne. He'd never even kissed her or embraced her. At no time had he visited her flat by the back stairs. "Is it you rotter? Clear out or I'll put the police to you," the witness stated he said to Browne when the latter arrived at the St Albans flat on the morning of the 24th of June last year. Witness said he returned just then from a swim. "Boys take notice of him, so you will know him again," witness alleged Browne replied. Mr and Mrs Browne had stayed at Ellie Anderson's boarding house in Randwick for 5 months, it was alleged. When the respondent was told to stand up, the witness said that she was not the Mrs Browne who had been at her house. On the 6th of May 1927 in the Bathurst National Advocate. In Sydney, when Mr Justice Owens took his seat in the divorce court today to hear the counsel's addresses in the suit brought by James Warwick Browne of Woy Woy for a dissolution of his marriage with Evelyn Browne, formerly Rose, on the grounds of her alleged misconduct with Bruce Nicol, Mrs Amelia Arnott was called as a witness. She said she'd rented a flat in July 1926. Some of the furniture was new, the bedding was new and the sheets had never been used. Mrs. Browne, the respondent called by her counsel, gave an emphatic denial in the allegation that Mrs. Arnott had called at the flat and had to arouse the respondent and Nicol from sleep before she could enter. It was also untrue that Nicol went to the door only partially dressed. Bruce Nicol also denied the truth of certain statements made by Mrs. Arnott. Counsel for Mrs. Browne submitted that the petitioner was a self-confessed adulterer. His Honour should dismiss the petition without making any finding against Mrs. Browne. Mr. Windeyer objected and said that in the event of the petition being dismissed, His Honour must take into consideration the quality of the misconduct. He urged that on the face of the evidence in the case, he could not do otherwise than to deliver a finding on the charges. Mr. Justice Owen said that he proposed to decide as best that he could all the issues before the court, both against the wife and the husband. As to the adultery charge against petitioner, his guilt was clearly made out. I cannot accept the view put forward by Mr. Windeyer that a man who without reasonable care has been guilty of adultery can come before this court for relief just because his wife has been misconducting herself with another man. The husband's petition was therefore dismissed. His Honour also found that misconduct had taken place between the respondent and co-respondent. Mr. Windeyer for the petitioner asked that the wife pay her own costs. His Honour, however, decided that the husband should pay her costs. Beyond that, no order was made to costs generally. And on the 8th of May in the Sydney Sunday Times, "You've not kept up your payments of £25 alimony per week," asked counsel of James Woy Browne of Woy Woy, an ex-grazier said to be worth £80,000 in the divorce action in which husband and wife are seeking severance of the matrimonial bonds on the grounds of adultery. Browne responded, "Neither would you if you were paying to keep a man and a woman." His Honour said, "Don't argue, answer the question." "Have you had anything to drink today, Mr. Browne?" asked counsel. "No," thundered Browne. "How dare you ask me that question? I had a lager shandy." "When?" he was asked. "I didn't look at the time," was the reply. "It must have been at 11 o'clock. It might have been at 1 o'clock. Asked if he was smarting over having to pay this alimony, he replied, "Rather." On the 25th of October 1927 in the Lismore Northern Star. In Sydney, an unusual case was before the divorce court today. In May last, Eva Browne was granted a divorce for a judicial separation against her husband, James Woy Browne, of Patonga, who was said to be worth £80,000. Subsequently, Browne petitioned for a divorce on the grounds of his wife's misconduct with Captain Bruce Nicol, an estate agent of Bondi, and Mrs. Browne replied with a counter-charge of misconduct against her husband. Both charges of misconduct were found proved and the husband's petition was dismissed. Browne now applied to the court to have the amount of £470 a year of permanent alimony, which he was ordered to pay his wife, reduced or cancelled because of the finding of misconduct against her. Mr. Justice Owen said that as the wife was proved to have committed misconduct without any mitigating circumstances and without anything to excuse her conduct, he saw no reason to relieve his obligations towards her, despite the fact that he too had been found guilty of misconduct. He suspended the order for payment of alimony until the further order of the court. James and Annie Foster had another child, James, in 1928 in Rockdale, New South Wales. This was in the same year that James's home, Patonga, was destroyed by fire. James Jr. died at the age of 2. The two other children James had with Annie Foster were Josephine Wendy. Josephine married Edward Pere Ducrot, an Englishman, and they lived at Beacon Hill, New South Wales. And Josephine died on the 21st of July 2014 in Blackheath, New South Wales. And Beatrice Hyacinth was the other child. She married Joseph Ernest Edward Hackett in 1944 at Kirgunyah, New South Wales, and they had 5 children. In 1930, James was still living at Patonga and working as an exporter with his son William and William's wife Lily. James owned a large amount in rates, so the Woy Woy Council repossessed his land. This site became the Ettalong Beach camping ground. James died on the 26th of June 1935 at Wallara, New South Wales at the age of 70. And in Woy Woy there is a James Browne Oval number 4, that has been named after him, as this is part of the land that James owned. James's siblings. Isabella Emily Browne was born in 1867 in Albury. She married Hugh Roberts Turton Thomas in 1903 and they had 7 children. In 1912, Hugh was a storekeeper at Hillsville, Victoria, and by 1946 he was an ironmonger. Isabella died on the 30th of April 1952 in Bentley, Victoria, aged 85. The Lockhart Review and Oakland's Advertiser published her death on the 8th of July 1952. The late Mrs. Thomas, linked with early Evangeline settlement. Mrs. Emily Isabel Thomas passed away recently at Bentley, Victoria. She was the eldest daughter of the late Wallace Browne, pioneer of Evangeline Creek. She spent her girlhood at the Old Mile estate, now owned by the only surviving brother, Councillor D. L. Browne. There are two surviving sisters, Mrs. May Davey of Kew, Victoria, and Mrs. Lilla McMaster of Gilgandra, New South Wales, out of a family of 10 children, all reared in the Evangeline district. Mrs. Thomas went to live at Hillsville after her marriage, where she reared 7 children, one son having made the supreme sacrifice in the First World War. She also had 7 grandchildren and one great-granddaughter. Her health has been indifferent for the past year, but she was only confined to her bed for 1 week before passing peacefully away in her sleep. Just a month before, she was so bright and cheerful when her brother and sister-in-law, Councillor and Mrs. Browne, visited her and were very interested in some colourful illustrated magazines she had received from her nephew, a professor interested in atomic bombs in San Diego, California, USA. Her husband predeceased her. She had a modern home built at Bentley. The picturesque garden gave her much pleasure, with the spacious lawns and shady white cedar trees and a wealth of lovely blooms. The kitchen garden, with vegetables and fruit for every season, was most prolific. She was a cheerful giver, and her beautiful fancy work and woolwork were much sought after for works of charity and stalls. She was a remarkable woman and had 10 talents. She was very fond of horses and outdoor life and liked the old ways. Her memory was almost perfect. She recalled recently that she could dimly remember a Sunday service held by the late Cuthbert Featherstoner at her uncle's house when she was 5 or 6 years old. She'd been reading Cuthbert's reminiscences in After Many Days. If you're interested to know more about Cuthbert Featherstoner, I did an episode on him called The Pastoralist, episode 55. Her granddaughter, Sister Frida Thomas, Deputy Matron of Warwick Hospital, cared for her to the end, so kindly and patiently. Mrs. D. L. Browne is also a cousin of Mrs. Wallace Browne Sr. The second sibling was Elizabeth Alexandra, known as Eliza, who was born on the 21st of December 1869 at Mile at Evangeline. She married Henry James Marks in 1903. Henry had moved to the US in 1901. He was 10 years younger than Elizabeth and was born in Melbourne to English parents. After their marriage, they lived in London for a short time, where their son Wallace was born in 1904. Their second child, Leslie Melbourne Marks, was born in Washington, USA in September 1907. In the 1910 census, Henry was working as a waiter in a restaurant in Washington, and Elizabeth died on the 10th of October 1946 in San Francisco, California, aged 76. The next sibling was Lucy May Browne, who was born on the 31st of December 1871 at Mile at Evangeline. She married Christopher John Batchelor in Victoria on the 7th of April 1908, when she was 37 and Christopher 34. It was a double marriage, where her younger sister also married on the same day. They had 3 children together and farmed at Taggart near Alexandra in Victoria, and she died on the 13th of July 1936 at Baddaginny, near Benalla in Victoria, aged 65. The next sibling was a brother, Wallace Sproul Browne, who was born on the 7th of October 1873 at Mile at Evangeline. He married Christina Jane Crichton in Germantown, New South Wales, now known as Holbrook, in 1897 at the Presbyterian Church. Christina was the daughter of the late James Crichton of Germantown. They had 4 children together. A daughter died aged only 14 in 1934, and they had 2 sons that survived. He farmed at Pleasant Hills near Corowa. He died on the 7th of September 1936 at his property Waverley at Pleasant Hills, aged 62, and the Cootamundra Herald on the 8th of September 1936 announced his death. Fatally injured, gun accidentally discharged at Lockhart. When the president of the Lockhart Shire, Councillor Wallace Sproul Browne, attempted to close the gate on his property, Waverley, at Pleasant Hills, The gun which he was carrying discharged, and he received the full contents of the cartridge through his heart and died shortly afterwards. As was his daily custom, Mr. Browne left his house after breakfast to attend to his sheep. He was on horseback and carried a single-barrel 12-gauge shotgun for the purpose of shooting crows and foxes. Returning about 11 a.m, he spoke to his son James and after a short conversation rode away again to attend to some other sheep. Half an hour later, Mr. James Browne saw his father in the distance riding towards his home. The country, however, is undulating and Mr. Browne Sr. passed out of view behind the rise. Mr. James Browne went to the house at 12 noon, and when his father had not returned some minutes later, his wife became apprehensive and asked her son to look for him. Going to the top of the hill near the house, Mr. James Browne saw his father's pony standing near the middle gate, and on walking closer saw his father lying across the track, about 6 or 7 foot from the gate. Running forward, the son lifted his father and spoke to him, but the injured man was unable to reply, and shortly afterwards passed away in his son's arms. Dr. A.B. of Lockhart was called, and also the Wagga District Ambulance, but on arrival the doctor pronounced life extinct. The district coroner conducted an inquest at Mr. Browne's residence in the afternoon when the opinion was expressed in evidence that the victim had endeavoured to close the double gate by using the gun to hold one side of the structure while he fixed the fastener. In doing so, the weapon discharged, the gun falling between the gateway. A verdict of death from a gunshot wound accidentally inflicted by the deceased was returned by the coroner. Mr. Browne was born at Yackandandah Creek and was one of the best-known residents of the district. He'd occupied the presidential chair on 2 occasions. For some years he'd been chairman of the Urana Pastures Protection Board. He was a staunch adherent of the Presbyterian Church and an active member of the Masonic Lodge. Nearly every movement for the welfare of the district had his earnest support, and he was one of the principal movers in the agitation of the construction of the Rand Line, which started from Henty in 1918. He was a noted breeder of merino sheep. Mr. Browne's clip always realised high prices at wool sales. He was a keen judge of stock and was well known and highly respected throughout the district. In addition to his widow, he's survived by his 2 sons, James Sproul Browne and Wallace Crichton Browne, each of whom live on the property. 2 daughters predeceased him. And on the 24th of October 1936, the estate for Wallace Sproul Browne came in at £29,930 that he passed to his wife and family. The next sibling was another brother, Henry Andrew Browne, who was born in 1875 near Wagga Wagga. In 1930, he owned a property called Providence, and he died in 1948 at the age of 73. And on the 18th of May 1948, in the Lockhart Review and Oakland's Advertiser, an obituary was placed in the paper. It is with regret we record the demise of Mr. Henry A. Browne, pastoralist of Providence, North Galaw. He was a bachelor and had lived for many years on his Providence property, and during that time he won deep respect of his neighbours. He was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Wallace Browne, who settled with their family at the Mile Estate, Yackandandah, in 1870, a property now held for many years, by the deceased's brother, Councillor D. Leslie Browne. He was never afraid to express his opinions, but had a fine reputation of being straightforward with all his dealings. In his boyhood days, tales of bushrangers were well to the fore, and what the boys heard rivalled the doings related in the Buffalo Bill novelettes and tales of the Wild West. However, a real bushranger did visit Mile. His name was Hammond, but unfortunately for the bushranger, he was not many hours on the Mile estate before he died. Harry and Les were keen to see the bushranger buried, but their parents had other ideas. However, to assuage their disappointment, the 2 boys made an early inspection of Hammond's grave and were very much tempted to open it to have another glance at a real bushranger. Dr. Roberts having certified that his death was due to natural causes, arrangements were made for the funeral, which took place in Lockhart. A large number of Galaw residents attended the service. The chief mourners were Councillor D.L. and Mrs. Browne and their 2 sons, Mrs. McMaster, a sister of Kirgunyah, Wallace and James Browne, nephews of Waverley Pleasant Hills, Alan Browne, nephew of Wagga, Eric Browne, a nephew of Loxley Pleasant Hills, Mr. J. Batchelor, brother-in-law of Euroa, Victoria. The next sibling, another brother, was David Thomas Browne, known as Leslie, who was born on the 21st of January 1880 at Mile, Yackandandah. He married Elizabeth Marie Crichton in Victoria in 1904. They had a daughter in 1906, and he died on the 6th of August 1966 at the family property Mile at Yackandandah, aged 86, and he's also buried in Lockhart. A sister, Anne May Browne, was born on the 24th of April 1882 at Mile, Erangeline, and on the 7th of April 1908, in a double wedding, she married Edward Graham Davy of Kew, Victoria. They had a daughter, Gwyneth, in 1912, and she died on the 8th of July 1965 in Victoria at the age of 83. Another brother, Reginald Francis Browne, was born on the 25th of May 1885 at Mile, Erangeline. He married Iris May Carroll in 1906 in Victoria, and they had 3 children. He fought in World War I and farmed at Pleasant Hills, and he died on the 29th of December 1950 at Wagga Wagga, aged 65. And the youngest in the family, Irene Emma Browne, known as Lilla, was born on the 9th of August 1890 at Pleasant Hills. She married Peter McMaster in Victoria in 1917. They had 2 sons and held land in Victoria and at Collie near Dubbo, New South Wales. And Lilla died on the 6th of May 1981 at Lockhart, New South Wales, aged 90.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.